Is David Blowbaum. I am the Director of Outreach for the National Test Prep Association. So we advocate for the appropriate use of standardized testing in college admissions. I'm also the co-owner and co-founder of Summit Prep. We have 2 offices in New Jersey. And what we're going to be talking about today is the University of San Diego report that came out. And it's a pretty mind-blowing report, as we'll get into. But the reason that I'm talking about it today is because I think it's an amazing case study in a lot of things that are affecting our students today and college admissions. So just to give you a sense of the splash that this has made. So Wall Street Journal, a math horror show at UC San Diego. The Atlantic, Washington Post, Inside Higher Ed, the Chronicle of Higher Education, a steep decline in students' academic preparation at UC San Diego. And it's been 4 months since this report, and basically every single testing and college admissions piece is still referencing this report. So let's get into, well, why? What's actually in this report? So in 2016, the University of San Diego started a remedial math class for its students. So they saw a need for that to help their students, learn or relearn high school math that they weren't as proficient in based on placement tests. And they were doing that to help these students pass the STEM majors primarily that they were in so that they could actually pass those math classes. Well, the University of California campuses, they went test blind in 2020. And so we're really seeing the ripple effects of that now. So between 2020 and now fast forward to 2024, and it went from 1% of students who were placed into remedial math to now 12% of students of UC freshmen at San Diego have been placed in remedial math. But it's no longer even high school remedial math. 75% of students, so 9% of everyone, or 75% of the remedial math students are now placed into Math 2. Math 2 is elementary and middle school remediation. And these are these are college students being placed into it. Now, you might think, oh, well, the college admissions officers just didn't do their job. No, what we'll get into, it's very, very hard to really determine from the transcripts that kids are getting, that the admissions officers are getting, who's actually prepared. And nearly half of the students placed in Math 2, again, not knowing elementary or middle school math, nearly half had taken pre-calculus and calculus in high school. Additionally, 25% of those students in Math 2 had perfect, unweighted 4.0 GPAs in high school math. So they had gotten straight A's throughout high school math, but were not proficient in elementary or middle school math. Now, all of this doesn't matter if you're able to remediate. Well, it matters a little bit. I mean, these are non-credit counting classes, right? So these kids, they're really delaying they're taking out more in loans, they're delaying their graduation to take these remedial classes that really, as a society, we should say, once they get to college, they're proficient up through high school. But this is the really heartbreaking thing, which is mostly hidden by the captions. The really heartbreaking thing is that the students who are placed into remedial math, they have vastly lower STEM persistence rates. So when you just look at graduation rates, they actually have very similar graduation rates. But it's because they're switching out of those STEM majors once they hit a math class that they have to withdraw from or they fail. So the data on them not persisting is from 2017 to 2023. Again, right after the remedial math class was first started, and it shows that few, if any, students who took remedial math classes have been able to graduate as engineering majors, for instance, right? In biology and some other STEM, it's about 50% the rate, but in engineering, 0. So we're really doing these students a disservice to admit them into programs that they're going to have to drop out from. They're going to be taking more courses, take on more debt, and delay their earnings because they're going to graduate later. So it matters a lot. But what's actually causing it? So it's primarily 3 things. There's COVID learning loss, grade inflation, and then also the test blind or test optional policies elsewhere in the country. Now, I will say a note about UC test blind policies. They call themselves test blind. They're not really test blind. They're SAT, ACT blind. They still use AP exams, which is ironic because while the SAT and ACT are largely universally available, very few students, relatively speaking, take AP exams. So we're actually, UCLA and UC Berkeley primarily of the UC campuses use AP exam scores, and these are not even universally available. Okay, so we'll get into COVID learning loss. So the NAEP scores are dubbed the nation's report card. And these came out 2 years ago now, and they made a little bit of a splash. They really should have been the original canary in the coal mine. So we see that, since COVID, there's been a dramatic drop-off in proficiency in reading and math among 12th graders, and that also extends to 4th graders, 8th graders, and 4th graders. It's those 3 cohorts that are tested. And so it was a decline that preceded COVID, but COVID really just dropped us off a cliff. We are at historic lows in reading and math proficiency. So it's only about 35% of 12th graders are proficient in reading, 22% are proficient in math. We see the same thing show up appropriately. It's an ACT conference. We see it show up in ACT scores as well. Again, we see it did precede COVID, but wow, I touched this and wow, okay. Anyway, all right, so we saw it precede COVID, but it's really dropped off a cliff since COVID. So COVID learning loss is going to affect how much the kids know. Now, you would think, what would happen to grades then, right? Grades, if they're measuring academic preparedness, we should see grades go like this and then drop off a little bit, right? Raise your hand if you think that happened. Right, exactly, right? A lot of educators in here. So this is grades. So you go back to 1966, and it was about 22% of students who, and this is just the university-going population. It's not all students. Again, this is about testing and college admissions. But 22% of students going on to a 4-year BA granting university had an A average in 1966. Fast forward to 2024, and it's 84% of students going onto those 4-year BA granting universities have A averages. And A is not even average, it's just common at this point, all right? And, it's not like people haven't noticed. So again, going back to the University of San Diego report, because it just intersects so many things that are important in testing and college admissions. Again, we can return to grade inflation. 4.0 GPA in high school math does not even mean that they know elementary school math. A quote that I like from Rick Clark, 2022, when he was executive director of undergraduate admissions at Georgia, he says, it is the very rare applicant, not even rare, but is a very rare applicant who has below a 3.7 GPA. Certainly a big part of this is due to rampant grade inflation in our state and beyond. 2023, John Ladding, Dean of Admissions at Emory. We're not as trusting, frankly, of GPA these days. Grades are definitely inflated and not as connected to true class performance as they used to be. So again, this is, people are taking notice. The irony here about Emory is that John Ladding went on to say, right after he said that grades are inflated, he said that they're going to be weighing external assessment, meaning test scores, specifically AP exam scores, more heavily. Well, what's ironic about that is Emory is test optional. So you're a test optional school saying that test scores are going to be more important to you than GPA. Just make your test required then. Okay. Now, what I hear in the online space, at least, is, well, who does this hurt? Who does grade inflation hurt? It hurts a lot of students. Again, as we saw in that University of San Diego report, we're passing along students, and this is who it really hurts. The low-performing students, I think, are hurt most of all, because those students who didn't know elementary and middle school math, they were passed along, not just passed along, they were getting straight A's, many of them. So no one could identify, hey, this kid really needs remedial math. And the longer and longer you just pass them along for, the harder and harder it is to fix all the problems and redo that foundation. Because again, when they get to, let's say you could remediate it in 8th grade, for instance. Well, now you have, up to 8 years that you need to remediate. By the time they get to college, we're talking about 12 years that you would have to remediate. You just don't have that time in college to remediate all of it. So it hurts the lowest performing students the most, who are not identified as low performing. And 90% of parents believe that their kids are at or above grade level. And of course they do, because really all students, not even just the college going students, they have A's and they have B's in school. And so if you're a kid and you're bringing home A's and B's, your parents are saying, hey, my kid is doing great, right? They must be at or above grade level. But that's just not the case. Again, we can go back to those NAEP scores, where the vast majority are not proficient. So really, I mean, I would just say this is lying to parents and to students. Now, those average students who back in the day, they might be getting B's or really, really working hard to get A's, they're denied that struggle. And those top performing students, I mean, they're getting A's then pretty easily. They're absolutely robbed of their potential, which you then see that robbed potential show up in them getting lower test scores eventually. And for all these students, especially these students who might be getting academic scholarships from their test scores, we're seeing that they get lower test scores. They're missing out on scholarship opportunities. They're missing out in higher earnings in life. Okay, so this just does more of a deep dive into the effects of grade inflation. So there's a lot of misinformation about the SAT and ACT, and most of it is, I mean, I'm in the test prep industry, right? Most of the fault of the misunderstanding of the SAT and ACT is the fault of the test prep industry. It was these big box test prep companies that said the SAT and ACT only test what's on, how you can take the SAT and ACT. That is one of the most deleterious things that we've been taught, I think, in a generation. And familiarity is almost indistinguishable from truth. So when you hear again and again and again that the SAT and ACT, they're just, gaming, you can game the test, you can go up just from tips and tricks. That's not the case. You might be able to go up a little bit from a 17 to a 19 with some tips and tricks, or a 25 to a 27. There's absolutely no way that you're going to go up very significantly on the SAT and ACT. Why? Because at the end of the day, these are very good exams at measuring, do you know the fundamental knowledge needed to succeed in college? They're not testing random things. They're looking at what's the knowledge and skill that you need to succeed in college, and then they're back solving and creating the exam to measure those attributes that we know that we need to succeed. So by robbing students of pushing themselves to get better at reading, to get better at math, we're ultimately also robbing them of higher test scores. And we see that their lower test scores show they don't know as much math and reading. And then we see this come out especially in STEM persistence rates, right? So this is for all the UC campuses, not just the University of San Diego. We see that if you're in the bottom 25th percentile of test scores and you go into STEM, you have less than a quarter chance of finishing in STEM. Again, you're going to you might graduate, but you're more likely to switch majors. And it just goes up and up and up from there if you have higher SAT or ACT scores. It's actually still low for the top quarter, right? I mean, if you're going to succeed in STEM, you probably need to be in the top 5 or 10% of that school for SAT or ACT scores. The study just didn't go into that nuance. We also, interestingly enough, we see the effect of, or the predictive capacity of SAT and ACT scores even after college. And so while, we should obviously use grades, but grades have very little predictive capacity after college. SAT and ACT scores actually do. The higher your test score is, the more likely you are, and this is controlling for all other variables. Controlling for all other variables and just looking at SAT and ACT scores, your earnings go up, your chance of success goes up. So again, we need to be teaching students that knowledge so that they get those higher test scores, so they get better outcomes in life. Okay, so we've gone through COVID learning loss, we've gone through grade inflation. Now let's get to the actual test scores. So, just to read off a couple quotes, University of San Diego report, high school math grades are only very weakly linked to students' actual math preparation. The single best predictor for math placement has been the SAT math section score, with the ACT score being an equally good predictor. Let's just jump down to Harvard. SAT and ACT tests are better predictors of Harvard grades than high school grades. Skip down to Dartmouth, which are the captions are on all of them. Basically, this said that they are missing out on, the quote is, they're missing out on hundreds and hundreds of high achieving disadvantaged students. Because what happens is when Dartmouth's middle 50% range, let's say, of ACT scores is 34 to 36, do you think anyone's submitting a test score that's a 31? No. But let's say you're coming from a high school where your average is a 16 and you have a 31. If you were to actually submit that test score, almost guaranteed you would be in. And Dartmouth's actually done the data. You 3.6x your chances of getting into Dartmouth if you're a high-achieving, disadvantaged student who submits a high test score. And so they're really, when everybody has A's and you look at that disadvantaged student, they don't stand out from the crowd. You include a high SAT or ACT score, and those are absolutely the students that that the most elite schools want to admit. Just to dive into the data, again, this is all the UC campuses. This is from 2010 to 2012, when we had the best data for. If you just look at GPA alone, it explains 16% of a student's GPA at the UC schools. SAT scores alone, or ACT scores alone, 21%. So SAT scores alone were a better predictor. You don't want to just go based on SAT or just based on grades. Together, they're 26%. So again, you always want to look at, you want to get the most information possible to make the best decisions possible. And it held, the predictive capacity held across all income groups, all ethnic groups, first gen, second gen, et cetera. So really, there's no reason to say that we shouldn't be using SAT or ACT scores to help admit these students, because these are the students that I care the most about if they're going to be able to succeed at their institution. And it's actually most predictive for those students. Now, a legitimate question would be, well, should we be using SAT and ACT scores if they just preference the wealthy, right? Now, what I like to look at is not the merits of something, but its relative merits, relative to other alternatives. So when we look at the other high school or the other college admissions criteria, is it better? All right, so as parental income increases, students have, on average, higher grades, more rigorous courses, more extracurricular activities, higher quality application essays, higher quality teacher recommendations, more athletic recruitment to like squash and fencing and all those other Ivy League athletics, a higher likelihood of being a legacy, more opportunity to demonstrate interest, a higher likelihood of applying early decision, which is huge. Some of these schools, they're filling 50% of their class just with early decision, but you're probably not going to do that if you're, a disadvantaged student. More ability to pay, especially full pay, and more connections. So the problem is when we take out SAT or ACT scores from the admissions criteria, the other admissions criteria tends to hold even more weight. And a lot of these admissions criteria are more linked to wealth than SAT and ACT scores are. And even worse, they have no predictive capacity for how the student's actually going to do in college. So, for instance, application essays, I work with a lot of students and they're very upfront about how they use AI. So you have a lot of students using AI to write their college application essays. Ironically, now we have admissions offices who are using AI to grade the now AI written essays. So it's absolutely insane, right? So it's not that there are better admissions criteria. And again, these admissions criteria, when you look at the data, essays and athletic recruitment, teacher recommendations, these actually do not help predict success in college. So they're highly linked to wealth and they don't help predict success. This is slightly less linked to wealth, and it actually does predict success across all groups. Okay, and now this is just a dig into the data. This is based on Opportunity Insights. They came out with a study on Ivy and Ivy Plus colleges in 2023. If you read the article called The Misguided War on the SAT, it was put out in the New York Times, all of this data was the basis of that article. So what I'd like to point out is, so this is the admissions advantage for being a legacy. Well, it's not from 0 to 100 here. It already starts at 90% here. So we see that when you're in the top 0.1% by wealth, massive, massive advantage from being a legacy, right? So where's the actual wealth advantage coming from? It's mostly coming from legacy. Then it's also coming from being a recruited athlete. Again, you just see that, as wealth increases, more and more advantage to those recruited athletes. I don't know, I just like repeated legacy here by accident. But right here is the non-academic rating as well. So you see non-academic rating, gigantic for the wealthiest of the wealthy. That non-academic rating, again, that's application essays, that's teacher recommendations, that's extracurricular activities. Now let's look at the actual academic rating. Now it does rise, but not as much as these others, not this tail at the end. And it actually, apart from all of the other criteria, it actually declines among the wealthiest, right? The wealthiest don't necessarily have the highest test scores or even the highest grades. All of their unfair advantage came from the non-academic, the legacy, and the athletic recruitment. So with the same SAT and ACT scores, students whose parents had a top 1% income, they had about double, and this is the same SAT and ACT scores, they still had twice the chances of getting into a top school if they had a if their parents had a top 1% income relative to middle income students. So again, it came from the non-academic factors. Now, if you were to, not that we're going to do this, though there'd be a case for it, to be honest. If you just did IB plus attendance, just based on SAT and ACT scores, ignoring everything about wealth, the percentage of students at those top schools who have top 1% wealthy families would go from 15.8% down to 5.6%. So you'd cut it by 2/3. But I would say we can do better than just this. I don't think it needs to be income neutral. So when we look at this is all the unfairness that's going on, right? So we could call this unfair, that the least wealthy get an advantage, but I think this is absolutely appropriate. This is unfair, right? These are the kids who have all the advantages, but and this was actually a 1510. So this was your chances of getting in to an IB plus college if you had a 1510 on the SAT. I think this is fair. I think it should be even higher, that you have an even higher chance. This is totally unfair because these kids have the most resources to get those scores. So in my opinion, what we should be aiming for as a society is for it to look like this. That the higher your SAT score goes, of course, you should be expected to have that higher SAT score. And we should be giving, an admissions advantage to students with disadvantaged students with those high test scores, because it's even harder for them to get those. Okay, so this is what I see in the future. And also, then I'll open it up to comments, questions, and scathing criticism. So in my opinion, artificial intelligence has made the college essay completely pointless. What I would actually love for colleges to do is actually to start using the ACT's optional essay and actually make that optional essay mandatory, because let's actually get some authenticated proficiency into the process. So they could require that authenticated writing sample, compare it to application essays, or ACT could even change their optional essay to be an application essay, potentially replace the Common App. Because again, even if they're not using AI, the wealthiest kids, they're having people write it for them or have it be highly edited. I don't have an answer on how to combat grade inflation. Obviously, I'm in testing, so I see testing as a possible means of fixing grade inflation. I really don't have an answer, though. But what College Board has been stepping in to do, I would love for ACT to step in and do this as well, would be to keep expanding their AP exams. So you might be like, well, why is there now an AP pre-calculus? This is paradoxical, right? Advanced placement pre-calculus, it doesn't make sense, right? Because I think the umbrella needs to be larger, and we call it authenticated proficiency. So when those kids have those 4.0 GPAs, but they're getting a 1 on their AP exam, that's another way where we can say, hey, we can identify, actually, they really didn't know pre-calculus. So that's a good signal to the student, that's a good signal to the parents, it's a good signal to the administration, and ultimately to colleges as well, so that we can have better matching. So I don't know if this is the answer, but this is one answer. I would hope to see more colleges return back to test required admissions. I think that's just actually fairer overall. And I think it would be, those colleges that prioritize academic success. So when you actually listen to the board meetings from these public universities, which I do, and a lot of them are on YouTube, a lot of these members of the board are saying in their board meetings, well, we want to stay test optional because otherwise it'll hurt our competitiveness with other peer institutions, or it'll hurt our ability to recruit athletes. So they're not doing it for making sure that their kids do well at the school. They're doing it so they get more applicants, so they get more recruited athletes, which I don't think that that's what college is about. Ultimately, college is a very unique buy and hold investment for life. You can't trade it. So we need to protect the value of these degrees. So, when a student graduates from a college, they should know that that value of that degree is going to hold value. And if that college continues to just push people along as well and graduate people who are not prepared to succeed, I think that hurts the value of that college degree. That hurts the value of every other graduate from that college. So these families who are paying tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars for a college degree, they're seeing that college degree, the value of that college degree erode. So obviously, it's something I feel very passionate about. I would recommend the University of San Diego report. I just think it's an amazing report to help us better understand COVID learning loss, grade inflation, and the role of standardized testing in college admissions. And that's all I got for you. Questions?